Hello and welcome back to my podcast. I've got a guest, Jeff Buske, on the line here. Him and I were just talking because my vocabulary isn't the best when it comes to like all these big words for all the special things that and all the awesome training that he's done. But to sum it up, him and I were talking about, he's like, just say I have thousands of hours of training all over the world. I'm like, got it. And so as a dentist and in implants, implantology, like all the surgery stuff, he's been at this stuff for about 27 years, which gives him an extreme amount of not just clinical experience, but educational experience. But what we're going to talk today is not really about clinical dentistry, right? Or what he's doing there, but more, I think, about what he's excited about. And then on an energy level, what him and I were jamming on and what we get excited about is like growth potential. And so beyond his clinical experience, Jeff is the founder of the Limitless Dentist Academy, dedicated to reducing stress, overwhelm, and burnout among dental professionals. His academy emphasizes achieving a balanced lifestyle through challenge-based approaches, enabling dentists to attain peak performance and become limitless, which I saw Jeff wearing like a limitless hat and then like this cool emblem on his shirt. And I'm like, how much could I buy one of those for? So I'm looking forward to seeing that to arrive in the mail. Yeah. And then Jeff's commitment to personal and professional growth is evident through his active participation in various dental organizations, including the International Congress. Okay. So this goes back to when he's like, just keep it simple. So he's very involved in his professional. All right. So he focuses on human high performance with well-being as the foundation, with the ultimate goal of having it all, with a challenge-based lifestyle, achieving peak performance while setting yourself free. All right. And then, so a couple of insights into dentistry and personal development make him a compelling guest, poised to share valuable strategies and achieving success without compromising well-being. And as with everything that I'm always doing on my podcast is, and Jeff, I've made silly reels and I'm always like adventures. I make up things called adventures of podcastering. So I say, I'm a podcasterist. And this is the adventures of podcasting. So I even tell people like, this is my first read through as far as I wanted to see what ChatGPT would come up with as an intro. And then I said, I have this formula that I learned from ChatGPT that said, ask it this about Jeff. And then it gave me that stuff. And then Jeff and I probably refined it like another 15%. So pretty cool stuff. But I'm excited. I'm excited to hear from Jeff today. He said, let's just free flow. Ask me about everything. Everything is on the table to be able to talk about. And so what I want to do is let's just talk about what I would say, what are you most excited about right now?
Man, I love where we're at because I love where we're at and where we're headed in I think hopefully in the economy, and I also too inside of practices. But what I'm most excited about inside of that space is having an opportunity to create some impact in dentists' lives. And here's why. Dentistry can be one of the most rewarding professions, and it can also be, I think, one of the most isolating professions to where you, like, at least for me, when I was going through some things, I thought, why am I the only guy who can't figure this out? And well, what I'm excited about is there is actually now more talk about mental health, which I think is fantastic inside of our profession. Whereas years before, people would be like, man, I don't want to say anything. I don't want somebody to know that I might be struggling with something. Now, just having the opportunity to start to create some of these discussions, which is amazing. And also creating podcasts where we talk about some of these things, not always talking about the light side of dentistry, but sometimes, hey, let's actually talk about some of the dark side in dentistry because it's a truth and a reality that exists, but it doesn't have to be that way. I think that's one of the most exciting things is to know that like, oh, I'm not alone. There's other people that have had some of these struggles and that they figured out how to get out of it and work their way into a great place and then take and create a roadmap along the way. I think that's what I'm most excited about right now as we start to go into this year.
All right, let me, I'm going to say something. I picked this up from something I listened to and I'll tell you this real quick. So my friend, Jen Kirkham, she's wonderful. She's in the sleep field of things. And she got into sleep, like really became passionate about it because of a personal experience, like with her kiddo. And so I heard this the other day is past perceived voids are today's present perceived values. And
Absolutely.
so the work that you're doing and the academies and the group coaching and the events that you're getting ready to launch, are these present perceived values, when you mentioned dark side, from past perceived voids?
Absolutely. 100%. Man, like if you were to look at where I am today and you look at, hey, it looks like life's working pretty well, and that's the thing too. Like when we look at things and we look at people, especially on social media, it's like we're seeing the highlight reels of everybody, right? And that becomes part of sometimes, unfortunately, a dangerous comparison game. But when you
Mm-hmm.
look back, and it's not even that long ago. Like when I look back at 2016, I was like in a very, very dark place. Like I had two practices, one that I was continuing to still build from scratch, and that was 52 miles away. So I was trying to build an incredible practice there, make a culture that worked there, sometimes feeling like you're doing doctor daycare, plus working 4 days a week in my main practice, and then going over there and doing some full arch dentistry in that practice just to make sometimes ends meet. And you're trying to balance payroll and everything and supplies and making sure that you've got enough money to make it all work. In the meantime, I was like just starting to come home and I would not be able to manage this stress very well at all. And so the problem is the fact that, look, in dentistry, as well as a lot of other individuals in life, we never really were taught, trained, or educated on how do you manage stress? How do you feel like you're not burning out? How do you take those things and put them into something that's productive or have tools to do that? So what I would come home, unfortunately, do is I would come home and sedate, and I would take and use alcohol daily to sedate. And
Yes.
then that wasn't the best for my relationships. Obviously that
Right.
created chaos with my wife and created disconnection there, disharmony with my kids. And, when you are drinking all the time, it's not the best on your body. And you for sure don't feel like getting up the next day and having a nice hard workout or training session. So
Yeah.
things were continuing to decline until it got so bad to a point where my wife and I finally had enough bottles of wine one night to really, truly get out and say what was on our minds. And she said, Jeff, she said, I didn't sign up for this shit. She said, the kids and I around here every single day on eggshells. All we want to do is love you. And you come home and blow up on us. And I remember sitting there and I was like, shit. I didn't even have a response because that was the truth. And that was what I created. And I remember laying there that night in bed. I literally prayed and I was like, okay, God, I know I created this, but please help me and help my family find a way out. And that was when it all started to transform and to change, because then I hired mentors, I hired coaches, and I started to just take what they told me to do. And, when your life sucks and when you're not a great place, like if you look at life out of a 1 to 10 and you're sitting down there at a 2 or a -1, it's very easy to go, hey, you're going to tell me what to do. I'm going to follow that. And I'm going to put it in play. That's what I was doing very quickly. I think what's harder is when life's working pretty well, like maybe life's working at a 7 and you're like, oh man, to give that up to get to 10, that's harder to do, I think, And so I just started to implement. And I was starting to see not only change, but I was beginning to see transformation. I was like, whoa, this is really incredible. And then getting fast forward to like today, where my wife and I moved into our custom design dream home. I now work 3 days a week doing implant dentistry, seeing the types of patients that I love to see, earning more than I've ever earned, and having less stress, having better connection at home with my wife and my kids, having a body that works and that is in shape. And so in between those spaces, there was a big gap. And so when you look at that, it didn't get there overnight, but I learned systems and processes. And like I said, created a roadmap to be able to follow to do that. And that's where a lot of this, just as your point, has come from or stemmed from. So it was a necessity to look at, how do I look at not only taking and making my life work, but also two, transform it into something where I can liberate myself and set myself free. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?
So yeah. So what I hear is that there had to be an awareness.
Yes. And it doesn't mean that you have to hit rock bottom, but to your point exactly, not only an awareness, but the ability to actually tell the truth for a man or a woman of where are you at currently? Like to get
Mm-hmm.
really honest with yourself, because we lie to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves all the time and say, oh, it's not that bad, or oh, I'll start the diet tomorrow, or
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'll go work out, I'll start tomorrow. And then that
Right.
just gets getting pushed off, right? As
Right.
opposed to owning it and going, okay, I'm going to own where I'm at. And then just asking this, yourself, okay, what is the best next step? And that the wording on that is very crucial, because it's not the next best step. It's the best next step.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take and insert that first best next step, now you can start to look at, okay, let's continue to make progress here.
Right. So, okay, there's a couple things that popped out that you said. One is, so you covered awareness, but then you covered acceptance. So you had to not just be aware, but you had to accept that as truth, as what it is. Not neither, I mean, it's good or bad, but I always tell people, like when people tell me with the age of 40 or 50 or even 60, and they're like, I think I'm having a midlife crisis, or a little after midlife crisis or before midlife crisis, I said, is it better to have these thoughts today than for you to be 70 or 80 years old, laying on your deathbed and have a crisis of what haven't I done in order
Yeah.
to make an impact in your family, your friends, your environment, whatever it may be. So that acceptance is a huge like part of that. And then what you described through a framework. And so I've worked through this framework before. It's D times V plus F has to be greater than R. So that's dissatisfaction times vision plus first steps, which would in your situation be best steps, has to
Yes.
be greater than your resistance to change. And so when people are thinking, they are, like I always ask people, like if they're looking at being dissatisfied with where they're currently at, there's like from a 1 to a 10, I say rank your life right now from a 1 to a 10. Are you, how dissatisfied? And this could be any category: fitness, health, marriage, whatever, finances. Rank yourself from a 1 to a 10. And when they rank themselves from 1 to a 10, if they mark something as a 2, then they're just kind of like, it's just like a pebble in your shoe.
Yes.
Right. But when they rank themselves as a level 8, to where it's not just dissatisfied, but they're disgusted, now we have it's almost like when people say push-pull marketing, now we have the push, right?
Yes.
But now what I always, and I'm curious about getting into this is good stuff, is that there's the push feeling with the disgusting, I don't want to be here anymore, I've got to go. And then there is the V, which is vision. And so what I tell people is that I see a lot of anxiety and depression, and a lot of times it's related to the lack of a clear and compelling vision for their future. And so then you go through steps of helping them create that clear and compelling vision. So now you have the push and the pull, and that's why it's D times V. And then once that person is like a level, let's say 7 to 10, now all of a sudden what they're doing is they're asking themselves and others and mentors, what's my best first step?
Yes.
Right. And if all those things are set, then the resistance to change will promote movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The resistance to change goes way down. Like when your house is on fire, you're like, man, just tell me, what do I have to do to put this fire out? Right. And to your point, when you're getting honest with yourself, I like to, and I think I loved what you said, because it doesn't have to be positive or negative, good or bad. It's literally asking yourself what's working and what's not working. And it doesn't have to have this connotation of good, bad, right, wrong, anything from that. Simply from the point of like, what's working and what's not working. And what I find funny, and I'm curious if you find this too, in talking with individuals, I find it really kind of interesting when you say, okay, so what do you want? And that's such an easy, innocuous question, yet it is so hard for many people to answer. What I find is when I ask that question, a lot of people tell me what they don't want right away. And I'm like, okay,
Mhm,
for you.
mhm,
But I'm
mhm.
asking really like, what do you want? And they're like, no, I haven't really thought about it that way. And
Yeah.
so I think just asking that simple question of yourself, like, what do I really want? It's a very hard question for a lot of people to answer. And to your point, I love your formula because I think one of the most dangerous people on the planet is a man without a vision.
Mhm.
And why do I think that? I think that way because as as men, especially because I can't speak for women because I'm not one of them, but at least from a man's standpoint, what I think a lot of us we're creators and we're builders. And I'm not saying women aren't, because I think there's plenty of women who are creators and builders.
Absolutely.
I know as a man, that's how I feel. I like to create. I like to build. I like to watch a process unfold, and I like to watch something accelerate. Now, if I don't have a vision that's greater than myself, what I have found for myself is that I'm very willing to burn something down in order to recreate it.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter if that is looking like that's burning down a marriage. It could be your business. It could be your health. It could be other relationships. All of these things are possible because we are having this innate sense of like wanting to create, wanting to build. So I find it being between either being a lack of vision or boredom are two very dangerous places for men to play in because
Mhm.
we often make some very stupid decisions in those places.
Yeah, what you just said reminded me of this quote, um, with Helen Keller. The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision.
I love, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So true. It
Yeah.
is so true. You
Yeah.
know,
And it is the death of you. I would say, and this is probably a whole different other podcast, but I would say that we have been marketed and sold by, and I won't say social media, but just programming, economic or social programming, that we are not to have our own vision, but we're to go work for in the vision of others. Right? It
yes,
doesn't mean that we don't go find a place and have a job. I'm saying that we lose our creativity and our building because we go over here, which doesn't mean that we actually have to lose our creativity in building. But we've been taught since we were kids that we are to go fulfill their assignment.
I think that's great because I want you to consider this if you're listening to this, that if you don't have a vision that you are excited about, that's pulling you forward, right? I think you then don't have something to enroll other people into because people like to be a part of something that is bigger than themselves. They like to be a part of
Mhm.
a cause or an organization that has a great, mission or manifesto or vision in this case here. But if you don't have a compelling vision to pull you forward and bring you up to a more peak state, then you put yourself automatically in a place to where you are going to be a lot more susceptible to being enrolled in somebody else's vision, to your point.
Mhm.
And I think that, it should be something to where we look at and saying, okay, what do I want here? And what do I want beyond this for me? What do I want for the greater good or the greater impact or whatever that may be? That may be as simple as like, what do I want to see inside of my practice? Because my practice is bigger than me. What do I want to see from my team members, my clients inside of that space, how I can grow it, how that impacts their lives. All of those things are the vision that as a leader that I've got to be able to cast for the practice. And I also have a
Mhm.
vision for marriage. I've got a vision for what it is to be in relationship with my kids. I've got a vision for what I want spiritually. And all of these things have to have their own vision. But if I don't, then you're right. I'm just going to be susceptible to whatever's being pumped out on social media or media in general and what we're
Mhm.
being told. Yeah, this is what you want. And so
Right. Yeah.
there's a crazy things happening right now with all that too.
Oh yeah. It's crazy. And I tell people what we've been, unfortunately, my experience is that I see that most people, and I always tell this to people, like I say things, but like I'm not coming across as judgment for I'm not a guy that's like, oh, I've got it figured out. And because I read these books and I talked to the great Dr. Jeff Buske, like I've got all the things figured out now. And so therefore, since you haven't done these things, then you don't know and you're smaller than me. I'm
Yes.
more of the person thinking, yes. And I'm more of the person that's like, I had this experience when I was a kid where I almost drowned. I was like only an inch from the surface. My legs were tied up and I was a kid and I couldn't get to the top. And this lady jumped in and pulled me out. So to me, everybody around me, I see them as somebody that's an inch below the surface. And if I don't reach, if I'm just there staring at them as a bystander, afraid to get wet, afraid to get involved, afraid to change the environment, if they will drown without me. And that could be anxiety, that could be depression, that could lead to suicide, that could lead to all kinds of different things. So as a person, I refuse, and I like aligning myself with people like yourself, like we refuse to sit idly by and allow people to be essential, live in that unlived life that they don't even know that they're unliving because it's just is. Like they're in this, they're just in a state of being until there's an awareness. And then the next step is acceptance. Then you help them create the dissatisfaction. Once the awareness and acceptance happens, then you're talking about helping them create that clear and compelling vision for the future and teaching them. And I heard this said this way one time, is that a settlement. So the definition of a settlement when somebody wins money is if somebody is sued or a company is sued, and let's say the person is awarded $1 million, but they're like, oh, you can have the $1 million over 20 years, or you could have $500,000 today. So a settlement is agreeing to settle for less of a value than what something truly is. And so how often are us men, women, humans settling for a life that's less than what can truly be lived just because we're unaware?
Yes. Unaware. And it's then settling into, unfortunately, a lot of times a life of mediocrity.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the life of mediocrity is because that's comfortable. And you know, comfort is the, you know, I think the other next biggest danger along those lines is like, hey, life's comfortable. But to your point, even then just getting down to, you know, some of your last days of life and looking back and saying, man, I don't want to look back and have regret in my life. Of like, man, what could I have been? Or what was actually God's design for me that I fell short on? You know, I want to play all in. I was given this body for a reason to be able to, you know, have an incredible human experience. You know, I think we're all beings that we get to have this amazing human experience and observe life and have incredible opportunities. And at the end of it, what we're truly left with is our experiences and our adventures and our memories that we create along the way. It's not all the stuff. It's not the house. It's not the cars. It's not the boats. It's not all the toys and all that. It's the choices that we get to make along the way that creates the unique experiences that we get to be a part of. That you're like, wow, that was an incredible experience. That was fulfilling, or that created change or transformation in somebody's life. Or, man, we just broadened the horizons of my family because we went and had this kind of experience, or went to this location or to this country or whatever it may be. And that's what things are about. And I mean, that's the things that I also get excited about is like, okay, yes, let's have a good time. Let's have fun along the way. But how can we ultimately look at creating an impact? And I love what we're doing here because, and I'm sure, and I've known you well enough to know that like when you're having conversations, Anthony, with people, like your conversations aren't just there to pass time or tickle somebody's ears. Your conversations are about looking at creating either a change or a transformation and allowing people to make a choice to create action in their life. Like that's what when I'm looking at, it can't be every single conversation, but part of my directive in going into, especially into this year, is making sure that my conversations are meaningful. My conversations are set up to ask you questions, to get you curious, to look at your own life and to see, okay, am I really playing all in? Or am I sitting on the sidelines? Am I sitting there in the stands? Or am I out in the field? Or worse yet, am I on the fence? Because when you're on the fence, there's only one place for that pole, and it's not a great place to be. You know, so I want to look at saying, let's make a choice to get in the game and to look at playing all in. And what does that look like?
Yeah.
And just asking those questions.
Yeah, that's what's fun is when we can get people into an environment where they get to ask, where they start to be able to think and ask those questions.
Yes.
And it's something that's interesting about what you said about me earlier, like you're intentional, you do this. So if anybody ever wants to do this, it's fun. But I had I hired a personal branding coach and a podcast coach, and so she's like, okay, I want you to do this exercise. So she went into ChatGPT and she said, put this into ChatGPT and it says, find Anthony Blanco, the business coach. So it finds me. And then it says, look at everything on the internet that's available and come up with three brand words. And so it actually came up with transformation, empowerment, and authenticity. And
Beautiful.
so, like you said, transformation, and you said some words, but it was empowering, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
just fun to see that when we start to study ourselves and we start to become more confident with who we are and what we're here for, again, that adds to the overall clarity of the
Yes.
impact that we're supposed to make, which then like the anxiety and depression and worry that people feel is because essentially they're focused on all the things they're not, or the things they haven't done, or all the whatever it is, as opposed to all the things they are and what they're able to do and who they're impacting. And again, it doesn't have to be somebody that like me or you that might be out there doing speaking or courses or training or whatever it may be. It could be somebody sitting in their cubicle at work that is just
Yes.
absolutely empowering and loving on their workmates that are sitting next to them. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, look, the modern man's currency, I think today is starting to become, just like you said, clarity and then operating in certainty. Because when you
Mm-hmm.
have both of those things going, when you're clear about where you want to go and you can look back and see successes from your past and you know exactly the vision that you're creating, now you can step into that with certainty to know, hey, this is where I'm going no matter what. I am on this bus to go here. I'm going to invite you along for the experience. And I think it's going to be a great time along the way. Are you interested in coming? And
Yeah.
that becomes something that's amazing. But to your point, it doesn't mean that you have to be up on a huge, big stage. It can be sitting inside of your business or your practice and just having the wherewithal and the presence to see where people are at. And also to know, like, hey, if somebody's got something going on, just to be like, hey, is everything okay? Just even asking
Yeah.
a question like that. I know even from my experience, like if somebody at the office or even a team member's asked me that, is everything okay? A, it's really impactful because it means that they've taken the time to actually notice something, they're present,
Mm-hmm.
and they've actually taken the time to care.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also makes me question, like, okay, what is my way of operating that I'm showing up that actually had them make that question available to me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
I got it.
very telling to be that simple to alter somebody's trajectory, even for the day. And you just
Yes.
sometimes don't know, a smile in somebody's direction could be enough to be the change that that person needed that day.
Absolutely. It's amazing. I let's call it the smile experiment. But last year at some point in time, I decided, and I told my wife, I said, it was like probably during the summer. I said, I'm going to smile and make eye contact with everybody that is walking past me. And it is amazing to watch how uncomfortable people are when make
Yeah.
eye contact and smile. But I'm not trying to make people uncomfortable. I'm just trying to give people some love. I mean, I just got my teeth all
Yeah.
fixed up, so I'm gonna give them some teeth love,
Yes.
right? But smiles make people feel better, right?
They
And
do.
so it's been a neat experiment. Now it's just a habit of when I'm anywhere, I don't care where I'm at. Last night I was at a Mexican restaurant and I smiled and nodded at anybody that made eye contact with me and said hi. And they're probably thinking, do I know him? But it doesn't
Right.
matter because I was
It does.
empowering them with joy.
Yes. And you know, look, we're all energetic beings, so we can feel that. We can feel those energies in it. And that's, you know, too, a big part of, like, you don't realize how powerful you are, you know, and that's where I think a lot of people downplay their power and don't, you know, realize they kind of shortchange themselves on that ability, just like what you did, to go have some eye contact and smile. That's very powerful because just you giving that off is a whole different way compared to just, I'm going to walk with my head down. I'm going to just look at the sidewalk or the pavement and I'm not going to pay attention to anybody, as opposed to like, when you're sharing that with me, what's automatically coming to my head is like, that's a man who's gotten up in the morning. He's taken care of himself. He's filled up his own cup first. Okay. And now when he's out in the world, he's giving it away. That to me, it
Absolutely.
just tells, just that story that you shared tells me enough about you in that manner that I already know that. I don't
Yeah.
even have to know your morning routine. I don't have to know any of those things. I just know that if you're creating impact, even in that simple way, that you've already handled your morning or yourself in a way that you've put yourself in a great place of power to be able to then give it away.
Yeah.
And I
So,
love that.
and I do so I'm going to go, like, I'm writing notes down as we're talking. And so I want to go back to, because the morning routine, and then you said systems. And so I'm going to say a couple things, but then I'm going to land the plane. So systems and processes, but then you also said, morning routine, which in my mind, as I call it, that's part of systems and processes.
Yes.
And then here's a framework, because you mentioned clarity and certainty, and clarity
Yes.
and certainty remind me of a framework that I've talked about before, which is clarity leads to focus, which is certainty.
Yes.
Focus leads to power, because you're like a laser as opposed to a prism and everywhere. And then
Yes.
power leads to maximized results in any area that you apply that framework to. So you'd already mentioned that, like, if I'm clear about how I feel about my body, my health, my marriage, my family, whatever it may be, that I'm clear. If I'm clear in these areas and I understand and define what the goals are, then I can focus on these things and I can know whatever the steps are. It gives me energy and power to follow through, because I have such great clarity, and then it'll maximize the results in those items of clarity. Does that make sense?
100%. Couldn't agree more.
All right. And then the morning routine. So this is where I want to start getting into some of the things that you teach.
Sure.
Okay. So you mentioned morning routine and systems and processes. So I'm going to loop that together. So I would like to hear, now I want to kind of get into the transformative things that you do through some of the systems that you might teach people in order to live a more vibrant, alive life.
Yes.
With vision.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'll just share with you, like, I've done this for a very long time now, where I look at it like I keep 8 simple promises to myself every single day. Okay. And I look at them as promises. Okay. And I think that one of the things that I love the fact that we're talking about power, because I think power can have a lot of different connotations now. Some can look at it positively, negatively. All I want you guys to consider is power is really, from our discussion today, for me, power is your capacity to go and be able to do or to handle or house something. So if you think of power as your capacity, it's along the lines of like, hey, if you're having an issue in your dental practice at work with managing people, and they're coming in with a level 4 problem, but your capacity is only at 2, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to have a hard time. We're going to struggle with that. It's going to feel overwhelming.
Right.
In the morning, if I take the time to create renewable power every single day, now I'm not having to go into my practice. I'm not having to rely on Starbucks to get me jump started with caffeine. I'm not relying on my lucky underwear or new pair of tennis shoes to do my treatment planning. I'm creating that capacity to go into my practice and thrive, because I know that sometime during the day, there's going to probably be some chaos that's happening. I'm going to have some firefighting that I'm going to have to do.
Right.
But if I'm showing up in a great place of power, now I can do that. So I look at kind of 4 domains in life. Your body,
okay,
which is your body is your health and your fitness. Okay. And I break it down into fitness and fuel, really. So fitness is moving your body. The fuel is the consumption of what we're putting into our body.
Yeah.
Then I look at being. So being is going to be my purpose, my vision, my spirituality for me, which is also my connection with God. It can be whatever that is for you. It might be universe or light or whatever it is that you believe in. Then I look at my balance, which is going to be my key and core relationships. So for me, that's going to be my marriage, my wife, and my kids. It's going to go beyond that, as well as to other people that I love or that I care about. So it can be great friends. It could be extended family. This can be your team members that you care about inside your practice, as well as your clients. But being a good and great steward of those relationships. And then I look at my business, which is going to be my practice and my bank accounts. So I'm looking at doing 8 simple things, each with 2 subdomains in those 4 domains: body, being, balance, business.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm taking care of that every day to look at putting myself in just a great renewable place of power. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
And
like
the
that.
cool thing is that, the fun part about this, Anthony, is that I call it, you can actually create a power hour. You can accomplish all those things in an hour, giving each one of those subdomains literally 15 minutes,
Yeah.
or you can extrapolate that out make that longer, wherever that fits for you. That's about meeting a person where they're at to see about just starting to get them. I call it stacking W's. I want to stack my wins every morning. So then when I go in, I've already won the day.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah. 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 I love it. And that is, you're right in the fact of like my morning routine is stacked in a way that I have a routine that I followed. People I've had people say this, a couple things, because I've had a physical transformation over the last 14 years, where I'd lost 45 pounds. And I also used to not be a morning person. And I have a herniated, L5, S1. I had 3 bulging discs. I've torn a calf, torn a rotator cuff. I've had sciatica twice. So these things I've had, right? These things,
Yes.
right? But my morning routine has never wavered. And the morning routine got established, and people have said, well, I've never, you're a morning person. No, I'm not a morning person. But I think it was like 13 years ago, I read a book by Hal Elrod, The Miracle Morning. And since then I incorporated a morning routine he has the Lifesavers, very similar to like this, right?
Yes.
Framework. And what it does is it gets me supercharged with the impact that I want to make for that day, because I'm studying. For me, I study the Bible for 20 minutes, and then I study something professional for 20 minutes, like every morning. And then I'm always listening to YouTube stuff on both of those things all the time.
Yes.
But intentional study of those things. So by the time I have my first conversation of the day, I have filled my cup, and now I get to go fill other people's cups throughout the day. And that's the power of a morning routine. So when people are rolling into work and they're like, just got up, they tend to put themselves, instead of being proactive with a power routine, right, in the morning, they are passive. That creates problems.
I see,
right?
is happening to them a lot more.
Yeah. There was somebody some idiot was in front of me, was driving like an idiot. Somebody was really slow. Starbucks screwed up my coffee. Like all these excuses. I'm like, okay, right, and that's fine. I'm like, okay, but that's where they're at right now. I'm like, that's fine. So when people get engaged, so you have the Limitless Dentist Academy. Are you teaching these principles through this academy?
Absolutely. We first come in and we start to create our first big framework that we start to create is all on integrity. And then everything builds on there.
Got it.
And so what we're talking about here with the 4 domains, we just simply call that's our core 4.
Right.
And inside of that, just like you do. And what's fun, Anthony, is that I'm a big believer in testing things. So, part of my morning ritual or routine used to be I would get up and I would train first. Like I'd go hit my workout first, and then I'd immediately go in and do meditation, which I've loved doing for years.
Right.
But, just very similar to what you said, my first thing that I'm excited about getting up and doing is spending time inside of the Bible every morning, first thing. And I actually love this. This is really cool. It's called the Business Bible. It's very
I've never
cool.
seen that before. Yeah.
If you look at the businessbible.com and you look back at the index, it's a normal Bible, but it's looking at all the business decisions that you could need, whether it be leadership or leadership, management, currency, trade, all of these things. You can find where it's all referenced in there. They've got it all highlighted. It's really pretty amazing.
Okay.
I love it. So I spend time inside of that first reading. Then inside of our software that we utilize inside of what the Limitless Dentist Academy, inside of our software, we've got another framework called the Stack. I do what's called a Bible stack, and it's kind of like journaling with some very specific questions. So what I'm doing now inside of that is not only just reading the Bible, but then I'm looking at things that like, okay, what did I see today in my reading? And how is that applicable to me, or why is that relevant in my life?
Right.
Beyond that, what is the lesson that I'm taking out of this? And what is the revelation that I'm going to take a deeper dive into? And then ultimately, what is the courses of action that I'm committed to taking from this experience today?
Okay.
Now, that gives us some drive. Now, that gives us a way to actually truly operate. And nothing against church or anything like that, but I think sometimes that's where we're falling a little bit short, maybe in some of the religions, is the fact that we can hear some beautiful things, beautiful passages, and we can have some incredible scripture read to us, have an amazing pastor. But I think some of the things that fall short today is the fact that we're not taking the time to make it really, truly applicable for us in our life. We might hear something great at church and go, oh, that was amazing. That was an incredible message today. But then when we leave church, guess what? It stays there.
Yeah.
We're not putting it into play.
That's right.
And so anything that I'm doing in my life is strategic in a design to look at saying, okay, how can I put this into play? And how is this also moving me towards what I call our impossible games, or my targets for the end of this year? How does this move me closer, faster, further towards my targets to finish in 2025, getting to the desired result?
Yeah.
Thanks. Whether that be inside of my spirituality, whether that be with my body, with my training, whether that be inside of my marriage or inside of my practice. So all of my morning routine or ritual, I like ritual kind of because I think ritual is like, there's a higher connotation to an experience beyond just like the checklist, but that's just me, just thinking of it from that perspective. But, you know, inside of that space, I'll share with you, like inside of my family or people or the relationships that matter, I had a coach ask me this a long time ago. He said, Jeff, when you show up with your family, he goes, I want you to think of this from a bank account standpoint. He said, do you show up and like make deposits into that, your family and your relationship, or do you just show up and make withdrawals? And that question hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Truth and the reality is at that time, man, I was just showing up and making withdrawals all the time and not putting deposits in. And then I would get upset about outcomes, you know, that could be upset about outcomes around sex or connection or intimacy or being present with my kids or not having an experience unfold the way I wanted it to. So I didn't realize that, man, I was falling short on putting in my own daily deposits.
Yeah.
Well, and it becomes very simple. It's not the whole answer, but it's a part of just this daily activity that becomes present, that also begins to over time shift your focus on the way in which you see people, especially people that are important in your life.
Yes.
It's easy to begin to take them for granted.
Yeah.
Well, it's not one thing that you want to be like, hey babe, thanks for the Whataburger that you got for me like 3 years ago. It's like looking at things like to today's reality of like, how are we showing up for each other? And what's our commitment? What do we want to see? So those things become part of my morning ritual that becomes so important to me. And just like you, then I'm also studying something inside of business, whether it's listening to something, watching something, reading something physically. And I have learned to read or listen or watch for what I call revelation. So when I'm reading a book or listening to something, I'm not interested in how long it takes me to get from cover to cover. When I'm reading through something, I'm reading for that one specific pearl that I'm like, whoa, yes, that's incredible. Same thing. I can now take and apply that into my business or practice.
Yes.
And that's all I need to read that day. Close it up. And now I'm off to the races. Yeah. So it's a very different way to operate in life. I don't care if it takes me a year to read that book. I'm going to know what's there. I'm going to know those principles or at least what's going to support me in getting to my targets.
Yeah. Yeah. I had heard, and I followed that same principle. I heard once, like, I care less about you trying to read 365 books and more if you read one book, but you got 365 pieces of information out of one book because you turned it into a study
Yes.
because of the nuggets that are in the book. And so
Put it into play.
yeah, use
Because,
the information. Don't just
because,
become a user of the book. Yeah.
because I think there's this, look, we're in a society now where there's no shortage of information, but information is like the ingredients that are all listed, and we can take those ingredients and put them together in a recipe. And now that becomes knowledge. And people say knowledge is power. And I still disagree with that. I think knowledge can be powerful if we put it into play.
Mm-hmm.
We put it in play and that becomes part of our experience. Now we create wisdom, because wisdom is what we create from our own actions. And that's how we apply it. And I think that's also a way that changes up the dynamic of this imposter syndrome. Because when you take information, look, there's not a whole lot of things that are created that are brand new that somebody else hasn't thought of or articulated or put out there. But when you take that and put that into your own experience, there's not another person on the planet that's going to think your thoughts, have your feelings, express your emotions, or have your same experiences or live life the exact way that you do. So when you take that bit of knowledge and you put it into play, that's going to be expressed completely different than any other person on the planet.
Yeah.
That's where you get your wisdom. Now that wisdom becomes your applied knowledge. And I think that that's also a very different way to look at things, to where you're like, because there's a lot of people you talk to like, man, I just feel like, I'm just a copycat of this or that. And you start to play this comparison game. But when you take and make that your own, now it becomes something that you can utilize. And then you're not having to look like another individual who said to me, Jeff, he said, when I heard, a lecturer talk, he said, this is true. You can take this to the bank and everything else. And, truths are very few and far between with over all the billions of people on this planet. And I ask a question now, instead of, is it true? I start to look at, is this useful? Is this useful in my life? Can it be applicable to, again, where I'm at and where I'm going?
Right.
Because there's always going to be people to our right that are ahead of us in the game, doing the things that we want to be doing, that we can learn from, that we can take mentorship from, that we can coach. I still have coaches all the time in my life and mentors in my life. I will never not have one. And then there's always going to be people to our left that we can help lead and support and get to their goals and their destinations a lot faster as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You said a couple things in there. I'm going to circle back around to, you said knowledge, they say knowledge is power, and then you went into wisdom. So I heard it said this way once, is when people say knowledge is power, that's without it turning into wisdom, because wisdom is utilized knowledge, you putting it in use. He said it's the equivalent of learning a bunch of, like, it's the equivalent of the Dead Sea. He goes, why is the Dead Sea dead? Well, the Dead Sea's dead because it has no outlet. So there is not fresh water going through there. And so essentially, are we people that where information goes to die, because then we become dead inside, which actually, what's funny, it can lead to this thing called cognitive dissonance, where you know all these things that you're not sharing. So it actually leads to anxiety and depression. That's a whole different thing that I had went down years ago. Just as like, that's fascinating.
It is.
But yeah. And then there's you mentioned the imposter syndrome, which I wrote at the very beginning down. So I'm glad you said it, because I'd heard this other concept that I really like, and it's the concept of the identity. So if you're a business owner or just a person or a leader, or which I always say everybody's a leader, you're a leader of your family. You're either leading good or bad. Doesn't matter. You're a leader. You're leading something, right?
Yes.
And so when we look at imposter syndrome, because I've had people ask me over the last couple of years, they're like, how did you get so confident? And I said, I went through a process to discover whose I am, who I am. And when I understand that, then I can step into my day confidently. Even if I do something wrong, I'm okay, because I'm like, well, I did it wrong, but tomorrow I'm going to do it right. So it's okay. It happened for me, not to me. But then I get into the thought process of, and this is what I love, is imposter syndrome comes from, there's 3 different types of identity. There is the lie identity,
Yes.
and the lie identity is the identity that the world gives you. So
Right.
if 75 to 85% of our programming is always like in deceit and disgust and turmoil and sexual and all these things, you are given a lie identity of the way you're supposed to think and behave. So we start to imitate the environment, and most Americans spend about 7.5 hours on screen time. Or when I say screen time, it's not just, it's streaming / TV, 7.5 hours a day. So what ends up happening is we adopt the identity of the world as opposed to what I would, and I'll get into this in a second, and that ends up becoming my identity. So the lie identity makes an impact of my identity, which my identity means how I want to be perceived in the world.
Yes.
Right? But I want the world to see me
in this way,
so I can be liked.
Yeah.
Right. So now we're into imposter syndrome because now I want these people to like me. So I have to study more of the things that I think that they want to like about me to become more of those things. And now I'm using filters, and now I'm saying and doing things that I really don't associate with my true identity, but they don't know their true identity. So this is just the way that they're programmed. But then you get to the identity, and the identity for me personally is who Christ created me to be. That's my identity. And Christ said he gave me, and I always tell this, if you've never really studied your spiritual gifts, and that's what I would say started to unlock and unleash and create an undeniable life that I've been able to live confidently, is when I understood that he told me, he said, Anthony, and I went and studied my spiritual gifts, took an adult spiritual gifts test. And he said, Anthony, your number one gift is faith. Your second gift is exhortation or building into people. And then your third gift, which was tied with my fourth gift, is wisdom and knowledge. And so as long as I am building into those things, I can live an unapologetic life moving forward with confidence. And then when I look at my strengths finder, with the Gallup Strengths Finder, that tells me that my number one strength is a learner, right? Yeah. But the funny thing is the lie identity that the world gave me growing up, I accepted it as my identity, where I was learning disabled the majority of my life. Majority of my educational life up until 12th grade. I was in LD classes, right? Yes. So how in the world is my number one gift learning if I had a learning disability? So I bought that lie, the lie identity. I lived into it, and I'm just not that smart. Other people are smarter than me. And so I act and behave in a way that's accordance with that, as opposed to being released in the identity of who I truly am. Does that make sense?
I couldn't agree more. I think one thing that I want to circle back on, especially for the audience to hear, is I am. I think I am is 2 of the most powerful words on the planet. One, it's a description for the name of God. And I believe that whatever follows those words is also an indication of how you feel or how you really start to see the divinity inside of yourself. Mm-hmm. You know, when and here's something that I kind of think, like, don't take the Lord's name in vain. Like when you start to say I am and you say something negative after that, that to me is the really taking the Lord's name in vain, because, it's the only thing that is really the ultimate perfection. Yeah. And so what I want you guys to hear in this discussion with just this part with identity is so important, because of whatever it is that you believe, you will absolutely 100% unequivocally live into, for sure. And you got to be careful with the words that follow I am. Mm-hmm. And so really think about that. Like I've heard so many times, right? Like, for example, like you might have a patient that just says, oh man, I'm a smoker, or I've always been a smoker, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And congratulations, you're going to continue to live into that. Or we could switch that up and say, up until now, I have been a smoker and I acknowledge that, but I'm ready to do something different. Right. And I'm ready to look at something different. So there's going back all the way back to the beginning of our discussion and getting real and honest with yourself. That's getting very straightforward and honest with yourself, acknowledging where you're at. good, bad, if you want to label it that way. It's just where you are. You are right where you're supposed to be due to the actions or lack of actions that you've decided to take in your life. You're right where you're supposed to be. So congratulations, you're at a great place. If you don't like where you are, there's no better person on the planet to fix that than you.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
And start to live into that I am statements, dude. It, just to your point, it opens up a whole new world. It's funny that you brought that up because literally 4.5 weeks ago, I decided in all 4 of those domains, I made and ripped a 11-minute recording, just audio. And I did, I am inside of my body. Then I did it inside of my marriage, and I did it with inside of my kids, and then inside of my, inside of my business. And I ripped all that and I sent it to my podcast guy. I said, put some amazing, cool, soft music behind it. And I listened to that every day on the way to my office. And so my office is about a 10-minute drive, which is great. Pull into the parking lot. I'm finishing up about the last minute and a half. Dude, I go in on point and on fire because, again, it's just going into these identities of how we see ourselves. And
So I like what you said. So I want to convert your ripped language into what he's saying is he recorded it. So I want everybody to understand that. Like what he's saying is I recorded this, sent it to the podcast guy that helps him with production, put it behind some cool music, and then he listens to that. Him saying I am's to him audible. That's awesome.
You're exactly right, for sure. And you know what? It's amazing. And one of the things that I'm going to start to put into play in my life was, let's say I'm at something or I'm learning something from you, or, you know, I am going to create I am statements around that. So when I'm gathering some new information of like, oh, I'm going to put that into play in my life. I am, like, for example, like I'm going to put into play with my life. Like I'm going to be an adventure creator. Date nights are dead. I want to create adventures with my wife, or I want to create never have done, you know, we're going to create these adventures. Now I'm going to make a statement that says, I am an adventure creator who creates, you know, uninhibited adventure and love and exception with my wife in crazy, unique experiences, whatever, you know, whatever flows out from there. Right. But it's now you're starting to see things differently. That's very different conversation than if you just say, I'm interested in creating some unique experiences with my wife, you know? And so, you know, interested people and passionate people are two different things. You don't see interested people signing up for a Spartan race. You don't see that. It's more along the lines of like the Vikings. They're burning the ships. Like,
that's right. They're committed.
You know,
that's
I'm intense. I'm inspired. Inspiration comes from within. Motivation, I think, sometimes comes from without. That's the thing with motivational speakers or anything that you're hearing. The minute that the motivation leaves, a lot of times, or their speaker leaves, then the motivation goes with it. But when you're inspired within and you start to then embody those I ams, and that's part of your identity, that becomes something that you're going to hold on to. The other thing I think it's an important thing to mention, Anthony, regarding identity is the fact that look at utilizing identity statements or anything in that regards, or what you're telling yourself. Start to consider some of the roles that you play, but go beyond that, because identity, if it's tied to things that could be taken away from you, that can change things dramatically and lead to a lot of disappointment pretty quick. So if my whole identity is around the fact of like, I am a dentist, well, if something happens to my hands and now I can't practice dentistry, that's a huge part of my identity. So I look at it like I'm honored to be able to do dentistry. I love dentistry. I'm passionate about dentistry, but dentistry is not my identity. Dentistry is something that I get to do, you know? Same thing. I mean, look, you can say I am a husband. Yes. And that's part of what I get to do. But let's say if I got a divorce or something happened, I died, my wife died, that's all gone. That part of your identity is gone. So when you start to now go deeper and deeper and deeper into things that are part of your core unit, if something happens or gets stripped away, it's not going to strip away who you are.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. Yeah. Cause you attach, one of the things that I just recently read that I can't remember now, was talking about, attaching, when you attach your, now it's going to bug me until as soon as I'm off here, I'm going to go look up.
Like that too.
So when you attach your identity to a thing, I think it was in regards to leadership. Then leadership by position. Oh yeah, I have it. I know what it is. So, anyways, they attach their leadership to a position as opposed to a person, to who their being is.
Yes.
And so when they get to a position, it's about an arrival of who they get to manage as opposed to lead, as opposed to understanding who they are as a person, as a leadership person, in order to help others grow.
Absolutely. Right? And that is a prime example. I think that is a perfect prime example of, if you say, I am a leader, well, guess what? Even if you lost your job, even if whatever, that's not being stripped away from you. You still have every opportunity to step in and lead. You're going to lead yourself. You're going to lead your family. You're going to lead the next opportunity that you show up or create. Same thing with I am a creator.
Right.
I'm a creator cannot be stripped away from you.
Right.
You start to look at these things and embodying these things. And your point, it is a way of being. It's the way that you're showing up and operating. Yes. As opposed to the old way of, I'm going to do more so that I can have more, so that I can become more. Right. You're showing up and already being. That way you can operate in a way of being, the way that you're occurring in this world. Like you walking down the street, eye contact, smiling. That's your way of being. Like, I'm gregarious, I'm outgoing, I'm sharing the love. My cup's full, I'm going to overflow. That's a way of being. Now you can share that, and then that starts to change things for you on what you're doing, and also too, you're having show up in your world. Right. So I love flipping it on its axis that way.
Yeah,
it's fun way to operate.
Yeah. All right. So I want to land the plane so that way we don't. And it seems like this whenever, and I hear this all the time with people that like talking to other people, and they get in a good conversation. They're like, dude, we could talk for like 3 hours. Yeah. And but we will land the plane. But before we do, what I want to say, I want to say one thing, but then I want to ask you to share specifically like about a couple of your programs. You told me you have something in February coming up. And so I want you, the listeners, whoever is able to listen to this now or in the future, that there are programs that they can get involved with you as a mentor, as a person that's been mentored, as a person that's just not talking from a position of a book that they read, but a life that they lived. So they have experience, and you have mentored under other individuals that also developed clarity and transformation with what they're doing. That Jeff is a go-to resource for that coaching, for you're specializing in with males in dentistry right now. But I know you shared something else with me a while back ago. But right now, that's the area of specialty. So I do want to make sure that you share that stuff. But what I want to say first, and then you share, is that about it. I think we maybe shook hands, or I don't even know if we did or didn't. I remember I did this speaking thing. So I did the speaking thing, and then Bruce Baird was this gentleman. I didn't know who he was. I was new to really. I was a rookie in dentistry at that time. I had no idea what was going on, but I did a speaking thing about clarity. And Bruce came up to me afterwards, and he said, "You need to get with Jeff." And I don't remember if you were standing there or not standing there. I just remember him saying that, and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, Jeff's a super." I mean, you spoke at the same thing, and I'm like, "Yeah, Jeff's super cool too." And then I'm like, all right, I need to get with Jeff. And then I never did. And then I sent you a Facebook message. I think when we checked it was like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And then your name came up again with me repeating to myself over and over for the last 3 years. I need to get in touch with Jeff. I need to get in touch with Jeff. And then your name came up. I'm like, oh, I'm freaking messaging him right now.
Yeah.
Right. And then I noticed it was like 2 or 3 years. And our conversation was like, yeah, let's talk. Okay, great. Blah, blah. And then we didn't. So I'm thankful for Bruce Baird for putting your name in my head. And there's a reason why that you were stuck in there. I don't know what it is. I always say that everything happens for a reason, but you stuck in there. So I'm super appreciative of that. But now is the promotional part of I want you to share like the things that you're doing because we talked about a lot of different things.
Yes.
But you actually teach a lot of this stuff and have group coaching around stuff, right? So I want you to share that.
Thank you, Anthony. And it is great. And there is, I think, in this world that 7 degrees of separation, with commonalities with meeting people, and there's people that come into your life and into your world. I've enjoyed some of our discussions that we've had as of late too. It's just knowing the amazing things that you're doing inside of my space with what I'm doing. You're right. I'm coaching men inside of dentistry, and we coach 5 simple frameworks, and it's really very simplified. And just because it's simplified doesn't mean it's easy, but it's a way in which we're looking at creating synergy and harmony so that you can be a better husband, a better father, a better leader, much more productive and profitable in your practice, and creating that synergy and harmony across all of those areas simultaneously, and have it be something that is sustainable. So it's not like I'm going to sprint 100 miles an hour and then I'm worn out and I can't continue to do this. This is a way that I've been living since 2016 solidly, and it just actually builds like compounding interest. So if you want to look at any of the things that I'm doing, one of the easiest ways is just check me out on Instagram at Jeff, Jeff, Buske, Buske. Super simple to find me on there. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. And if you want to check out just some of the things, I'll actually just tell you too, it's got a couple little tweaks. My new web page, and it is the Limitless Revolution.
Revolution, okay.
So limitlessrevolution.com. And there's got a couple little things, but you can at least get a preview of what we're starting to do. And it's got some links in there. We've got an event coming up at the end of February down in Puerto Vallarta. And then at the beginning of 2026, I'm super excited about this, is that we're going to put on a complete men's event down in the Dominican Republic. Anthony, I'd love for you to be there. Because being around amazing, like-minded people, where we're going to go through, actually, we'll have some physical evolutions, but it really is unpacking all these things and seeing, not only learning it in your mind, but experiencing it in true evolutionary style form. When I train, especially in a live event, I like it to be an experiential process, because it just drives home the teaching in such a manner, and you're creating a training environment that's so conducive to now being able to take that back. And now you've had this experience of like, okay, I am confident that I can make this work in my life. That becomes a whole different thing compared to just always, trying to read something and learn something from a book and put it into play. Right. The other thing that we do is that I've got a mastermind called the Ignite Accelerator, and we meet weekly, and it's with me, which is great. I love leading this weekly. We do a discussion for an hour and a half. We meet weekly, and we're putting all these principles into play so you can learn them and so you can live them in your life. We get that underway, and it's a 6-month commitment. But the beautiful thing is you will have all these frameworks down, and you start to learn how to operate with that in your life. You've got amazing software to track things, so we're stay on target, very organized. And it's what a place is that, it's a place that will meet you where you're at. It doesn't mean that you have to be a person where all the wheels have come off the bus and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm stranded. I don't know where to go. It can meet you there. It might be somebody who's got like maybe a flat tire, a little low here, and we just need to air you up here and get you going down the Autobahn again.
Yeah.
That is something that if you've got any interest or anything that we've talked about today, anything that I've shared is something that piques your interest, or I can support you or help you in a way, please reach out to me. And whether we work together or not, if there's a way that I can help you or support you, I'm more than happy to do that.
All right, man, I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time. I look forward to the things that we're going to creatively, I always say creatively, maybe build, not build. I always tell people like, there's never any pressure. I just am a person that shows up and says, I don't know.
Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's
But it
go.
is, yeah. But I do like the alignment in the betterment of the human, the betterment of males to serve as a better role model in their family. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate your time, man.
Anthony, thank you for having me on as a guest. I appreciate your time as well and what you're doing in the world. So thanks, brother.
All right. Thanks.
Have an amazing day.